Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. I'm going to do a little bit something different today. I'm going to be reviewing the first 54 issues of Saga. I just finished the 9th trade, and I wanted to give my spoiler-free review on that. I will be going over the author's backgrounds, both Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan. Talk about what the book is about, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend it to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. So Saga is a series, a comic book series that is up to issue 55. They just released the 55th issue after about a 3-year wait. So this is actually probably a good time to get caught up if you haven't started reading it already, because I believe it is going to be ongoing. The author is Brian K. Vaughan, who's the writer. Fiona Staples is the artist. Brian K. Vaughan is probably still best known for Y: The Last Man. He's done other work. I think he did some work with Lost as well as Under the Dome, the television show when that was going. He's still probably best known for Y: The Last Man. He has done some other series. And Fiona Staples is an artist from Canada. She's done a little bit of work with, I believe, Archie Comics. But this is what she is best known for. And what Saga is about a couple who are on two sides of an intergalactic war. And they become lovers, they have a child, and they basically go on the run because their child basically is a symbol of the possibility of the ability for people to get along and to end this war that's kind of dragged everybody in the universe onto one of two sides between they call the wings and the horns. The horns are magic users who have ram-like horns growing out of their head. And they have typically very traditional ways of doing things, traditional way of life, as opposed to the wings, who have wings on their backs, and they have mostly modern technology or fight with basically laser guns and laser cannons. And they're a society that is more similar to, I would say, our American contemporary society. So they're kind of obsessed with gadgetry and things of that nature. And so throughout this war between, I think one is on a moon and one is on the planet, between the war between these two factions, they've essentially, in one way or another, conscripted every other species in the universe to kind of be on their sides. It very much is, to me, the way I describe it when I talk about it, it's basically like Star Wars if it was actually about, Star Wars was actually about war, in that people die all the time in this book. It's very gory. There's a lot of sexuality. There's a lot of PTSD, and Brian K. Vaughan, I think, does a job of going into the minds of what this does to people psychologically, and I think that's essentially, though, what the book is about. It's about really this couple and who's trying to protect their child as they're on the run in this intergalactic war. That's basically what you need to know from jump. What do I like about it? I think Y: The Last Man, which I'll probably be comparing this a lot to, Brian K. Vaughan is really good at coming up with interesting characters. I think he's really good at making them each distinct enough, especially in their speeches. You have two characters in this. There's a bounty hunter, and there's also a character who is a nobility who's called Prince Robot. And Prince Robot and the character The Will, who's basically a bounty hunter, have I would say, very similar personalities. If on paper they're very similar characters, but their way that they express themselves is very, very different and very unique. I think Brian K. Vaughan the world is very imaginative. The situations the characters get themselves into is very imaginative. The kind of politics and world building is really interesting. I think there's a lot of little details in there for you. There's little details in there that make it feel like a quote-unquote real place. I'm not sure if this is Brian or Fiona, but there's a situation where the robot kingdom is essentially a feudal society. It's very stratified as far as social hierarchies, and you can tell where everybody falls in the hierarchy based on the headset that they wear. So some characters who are of lower status have essentially old black and white televisions. If they are in the army or the military and they're mid-ranking officers, they'll have Apple CRT computers, and if they're nobility, they basically have HD TVs. And the king has a giant, huge, widescreen HD television to basically let everybody know that he's the king of this kingdom. So little details like that are really interesting. Like I said, it's very raunchy. It's very full of sex. which felt, again, real and organic to me. And I think the characters act in mostly believable ways. I think Fiona Staples has a really nice style that fits in well with this book. Her design for a lot of the characters is top notch. I think she does a good job of making everybody look distinct from one another. The character design of like monsters, for lack of a better term, or just kind of wildlife are all usually really cool. So I think those are the positives of it. If I had to say the negatives, they're pretty light on negatives. I think Brian K. Vaughan, one of the things that I know is that there's a lot of characters in the book, and as the book goes along, it becomes a little bit difficult to kind of pull the threads apart. And it feels like sometimes I have to like think back, well, what is the motivation of this character? Why are they doing what they're doing? This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. That happened a couple times. There's a lot of character deaths in the book, and I think one of the reasons for that is to kind of, he introduces a lot of characters, and I think that's to kind of trim it back. It also, again, is to show that this is a violent world where people die all the time in this intergalactic war, and that's just going to be a part of the life of the characters. But sometimes it was hard to keep those things together. There's some characterization I think that's a little thinner than others. There is I think the biggest concern I have is sometimes the pacing. It feels like sometimes the book is in fourth gear and just zooming, and there are times where I wish he had maybe taken a step back to say, well, this character's gone now. What is the impact on this group? And there's a couple times where I noticed that didn't happen, and I was a little bummed about that. On the art style, the only thing I can think of off the top of my head that I didn't care for is there's sometimes establishing shots where I wasn't quite sure where I was in the book that doesn't really do a very good job of letting me know where I am in the page, what part of the galaxy I'm in. So I had to like sometimes go back and check that. Overall, though, I think it's really fun. It's a fun book if you are an adult and like sexuality and violence in your comics. This is a pretty good one. I think the story of family and these, I think, the obvious metaphor here is the war that all families go through to stay together, and there are real disagreements between a lot of the characters. As the book goes along, the main father character, Marco, begins to become more and more of a pacifist, and the question of whether or not pacifism is a viable philosophy to have in a world that's constantly at war, if that's something of a cop-out. And so that starts festering in the story. Overall, I recommend it a lot if you're someone who likes those things. Who would I not recommend it to? I think if you don't like any of the elements that I mentioned, I think there are probably people who will think it's probably too fantastical. I will say there's magic in the story, so anytime that you have that, the rules of the story aren't really set, and so sometimes things will happen that don't feel like they would have the full impact if there wasn't magic, and so the rules aren't really well laid out. I think that could probably bother some people. I still would probably say Why the Last Man is had more of an emotional impact for me than Saga has had so far. I think Saga is fun, and it's a fun ride, but I think as far as the emotional impact, I still think Why is probably the best thing he's done. This is still ongoing, so who knows what will happen in the future. And if it runs another 36 issues and it ends perfectly, then maybe I'll reassess that. I've enjoyed it quite a bit up to this point. I think he does a good job of kind of laying interesting flashbacks with the narrator, who is the little girl in the story, whose name is Hazel, who is the son of both of these characters who are kind of on the run. I thought that was cool. But that's Saga. If you haven't gotten into it, maybe a good time to pick it up and maybe read the first couple trades. They're usually in most libraries. If you don't want to spend the money on the book just to see if you like it, I would recommend getting the first trade. First trade sets the tone pretty well. It is a funny book in parts, and I think Brian K. Vaughan handles that balance of tone really well here, like he did in Why. So that's Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, the first 54 issues. Like I said, there's a ton of stuff that goes on. I wanted to avoid spoilers for it, so that is that. Next time I'm going to be reading, let me see if I can grab it, The Dawn of Everything by David Gruber and David Wingroth. I'm going to be reading that for next time. So until next time, please, if you haven't liked the video, subscribe to the channel if you have enjoyed this, and feel free to leave a comment below. If you have read Staples and, if you have read Saga and your thoughts on it. Until next time, bye.